that, we are going to be inviting in the fifth panel. So the fifth panel will be talking about black futurities, black futures in black Canadian studies. And that will be anchored by Dr. Selina. So that will be anchored by Dr. Selina. Please, a round of applause for Dr. Selina as she comes up. So for this panel, we have Dr. Sam Tecle, Dr. Anne-Marie, Dr. Ornella, Dr. Chevy, and of course, Dr. Selina. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Am I speaking? Am I being heard? Thank you. So I would like, this is the last session, and we can be here until midnight. No, I'm joking. But I would like, if you are able to stand, please, even online, if you are able, I'm inviting you to stand, and even the panelists, I'm inviting you to stand. So if you've been in my circles, and we have not talked about Twalabam or the Amapiano, then we are not friends. It's not official. So if we've been together and we have not talked about it, let's make it official after this. Let's talk about Twalabam. But nonetheless, there is this very viral videos that are going on online, and it's about dancing Amapiano. And if you know anything about Amapiano, it's a very robotic kind of, at least the Twalabam is very robotic. So we're going to play a small 30-second tutorial of Twalabam. So please, this is practical. You're going to be looking at it, and we stop it, and we do Twalabam, right? 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 Yes, yes, we are going to do that. Thank you. Okay, we are going to do that. If you've been practicing like me and Rhonda, I knew I've got you, girl. We're going to show them today. So we're going to play it again, and we try to do the Twalabam. And if we don't get it now, it's okay. Please go and practice. Next time we meet, we are doing this again. So be warned. Okay, play the music, please. Thank you so much, everyone, for indulging me. Thank you so much. So I've just gotten a message. I'm not supposed to be reading this, but I'll read it. We have a hard stop at 5:35. So this means no monologues, colleagues, right? Yes. So thank you so much. This has been a very rich day. I thoroughly enjoyed just the stimulation, the provocations, and thank you so much to the keynote speech. I really enjoyed that, and the answers, the responses to the questions that were so rich. So without further ado, I would like us to introduce ourselves. I'm Selina Mudavanhu, and I am a faculty member in Communication Studies and Media Arts here at McMaster. So I will start with my colleague, and we'll just introduce ourselves.
Yes, my name is Ornella Nzindukiyimana, and I am an associate professor at St. Francis Xavier University, which is in Antigonish, Nova Scotia, which is the unceded and traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people. and also home to a large and storied African-Canadian population. I study and research and teach Black Canadian sport history in the Human Kinetics department. I somehow stumbled into this job, this path. I started out as a science student and then did a history project and never looked back. So I'm very honored to be on this panel. I've learned a lot today. This has been a great symposium, and I'm looking forward to this panel.
Thank you so much, Ornella.
Nice to meet you. Good afternoon. Buenas tardes. My name's Stacy and Creech de Castro. I'm a postdoctoral fellow here at McMaster University in the Faculty of Humanities and the Office of the Vice Provost, Teaching and Learning. I'm from the Dominican Republic. I've been in Canada, or this place we call Canada, for about 7-8 years now. My work is mostly located in the classroom. I teach for ABLD, the Africa and Black Diaspora Studies minor. I'm co-founder of the Latin American Network at McMaster University, so I am an instructor for the interdisciplinary minor in Latin American and Latinx Studies. I teach for ArtSci, the English and Cultural Studies department. I do a lot of teaching. I think my work lies at the intersection of Black Latin American, Afro-Latinx, Caribbean studies, and Black feminism. And so maybe I can talk about that later. But
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for the conference organizers and all the labor that went into convening us and putting this together. Quickly, I'm Sam Tecle, and I teach at Toronto Metropolitan University. That's at least what we're calling it now. I'm in sociology. I'm excited. I'm teaching a course, redoing the Black Popular Culture course in the fall. So really looking forward to that. And I guess to put it succinctly, my parents come from the Horn of Africa, and I really look at how Black diasporas from that region of the world meet Black Canada. And also meet Blackness in the US and Blackness in the UK. So my work is a conversation between the Blackness they meet and the Blackness they bring, I guess.
Thank you so much. And please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Selina. And also I echo the gratitude to the organizers for this absolutely beautiful event. I'm originally from Montreal. I wish I could pronounce. I feel very irresponsible for not having the name in Indigenous properly. I'm currently an assistant professor in sociology here. I'm part of the Black cohort, started in 2021. And just a quick note that, I come to this, I guess you could say it's almost my second or third career, because I never really saw myself in academia. My passion is to work at this grassroots, always has been, always will be. But over the course of, doing work at the community level and public policy, I was very disappointed with the kind of work that was being done on Black youth and Black students. And so I decided that we needed to insert our voices into the literature that's produced in this country. And so I decided to go back and do a PhD. And so since then, I've been developing a program mainly around really focusing on how institutions reproduce racism and racial inequality. Because too much of the research has been on group variables, individual variables. I'm a sociologist. And so I really think we need to hold institutions accountable. Welfare, policing, you name it, for reproducing racial inequality. So my focus is mainly on racial politics, resistance. And then the last year I started, I come from the community, so I still do community-based research. A couple years ago I started a project bringing Black and Indigenous youth to look at the question of police racism. And I'm very pleased that, one of the highlights of my year was a community forum we did in Montreal in December with colleagues and I from the Indigenous Support Workers Project to share some preliminary findings we gathered from our interviews. So I'm moving increasingly to looking at Black and Indigenous resistance to police racism.
Thank you so much, Anne-Marie. And we'll move to our colleague online.
Greetings everyone. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay, so first and foremost, I want to thank the organizers for reaching out and sending positive energy to everyone who are there right now. I'm enjoying the sessions and the discussion online. So my name is Chevy, Eugene. I'm an assistant professor at Dalhousie University in Nova Scotia. I'm in the political science department. In addition to that, I'm the Black and African Diaspora Studies program. I'm from St. Lucia, the Caribbean, originally, but been living in Toronto. Lived in Toronto for 20 years, and I recently moved to Halifax last year. My research is on the Caribbean reparations movement, the decolonial movement of the Caribbean reparations movement. In addition to that, I'm looking at the reparations movement in Latin America, but more specifically in Colombia and Brazil, and also thinking about how we could conceptualize and think about reparations from a Canadian context. In addition to that, why enter the conversation? I enter the conversation in Black Canadian Studies or Black Studies from a very diasporic lens. So in addition to that, I'm the Caribbean Ambassador for the Pan-African Council. Our office is based in Rwanda, so a lot of what I do outside of academia, I would say conversation, we talk about community, is across Latin America, the Caribbean, and the African continent as well. So thank you for having me. Looking forward to participating in this conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, colleagues, for being brief and to the point. We just heard from the keynote that many of us draw from scholarship and networks in the US in our work. What can we learn from other contexts, particularly the US, as we carve out our own path in Black studies in Canada? What can we learn? Anyone is free to go for it.
I can go first, I guess, and jump in and see what I can do with that. It's a difficult question, let me just say, and I appreciate that we have only about an hour, and that we can't really corner everything about these deep questions in that hour. But if I could contribute anything to that question, it's just like our keynote really sort of emphasizes, to not be apologetic about it. It's really not about seeking friends and all of that, but it's really about taking space, and that cannot be done in a polite manner, which maybe the Canadian context wants us to espouse. We need to be forceful about wanting to take that space if we want to really take it. It's not going to be given to us. I think the history, the Canadian history itself has shown it, but Black history overall, globally has shown us this. So it's about being forceful, it's about being unapologetic, and really seeking it out. I literally just flew in yesterday from Denver, and I always do get invigorated by meeting American colleagues, because they remind us that you just gotta take it. You have to take it and do it in solidarity with each other, which I think is a little bit of what is missing in the Canadian context, which I'm speaking to a little bit coming from being the co-president currently of the Black Canadian Studies Association.
Thank you. Yeah, anyone can jump in.
Yeah, it is a difficult question. I agree. And as I was thinking about this, we've heard so many great things today about, what we can do in Canada, etc. And so I'd like to focus on the other context part of the question, and think about what my colleague, Dr. Rodrigo Navarro-Perez, calls hemispheric solidarities. And so what I invite students to do is to think about Black Latin American and Afro-Latinx ways of knowing and being, right? And so I think that building upon that is key, especially because there are over 120 million Black African descended people in the Americas, right? And so think about Brazil, think about Haiti, Colombia, the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, Cuba, etc. And so to me, that's important to think about, especially because, you know, if we're thinking about like drawing on scholarship and networks and thinking about what has worked and what hasn't, and thinking about things like community engagement and you know, institutional models that have worked out, then I think looking to, for example, the works of, you know, Afro-Puerto Rican women who are activists, you know, Inga Llorens, whose work is always pointing to, you know, the ways in which Black Puerto Rican women or Afro-Puerto Rican women are building environmental justice and activism in Puerto Rico. Or thinking about Juliet Hooker, whose work, you know, on Afro-Nicaragua is thinking about the spatialization of race and the racialization of space and whether or not there's a difference. Afro-Dominican scholars, Dixa Ramirez, Gloria Garcia Peña, who think about, you know, whether or not there's a difference between nationality, race, ethnicity, because we've probably all seen the Dominican meme, right? Or maybe not, but the running joke is if you ask, you know, a Dominican person, are you Black? They will say, no, I'm not Black, I'm Dominican. And so thinking about those questions in the classroom is important, I find, because then, you know, you sort of invite students to bring their whole selves into the classroom and to think about whether or not identity is fluid and malleable. It's not sort of like fixed, right? It's not a sort of fixed category. So, you know, these kinds of people who are doing important work within but beyond the bounds of the academy, within, you know, disciplinary fields, but ultimately to like blowing that up and saying what is possible and what it means to be human. And so I think, yeah, I'll stop there, but I think that's important. Oh, actually, wanted to say as well, there are important, you know, things happening, for example, in Mexico, in Oaxaca, Veracruz, Afro-Mexican people are leading the way in like social justice movement, activism, etc., but also thinking about indigenous solidarities, right? So Afro-Indigenous, you know, Afro-Zapotec Mexican people, and so what does that mean? So yeah, stop there.
Thank you so much. I see online, do you want Chevy to jump in and respond?
In regards to what we could learn from the keynote, and also, I will not even limit it just to the US, but I'll start with Canada first, right? When we think about the intellectual struggle, or even before the intellectual struggle, the student movements. So the keynote mentioned, I think he opened his talk on the Sir George Williams University Affair, which I think is a very profound piece of history in the Black radical tradition in Canada. But I would say what came out of that, I mean, a few things came out of it, but one of the key things that came out of it mirrors what took place in 2020 after the public lynching of George Floyd. Caribbean students in partnership working with Black Canadian students and students from the African continent and also Latin America as well. What came out of that was Caribbean studies, right? Caribbean studies, the same way Black studies departments are growing across Canada. What came out of that was Caribbean studies, for example, at York University. And it came out from because students were letting Black, well, I would say white media, white Canadian media know that Caribbean students and Blackness are present in Canada, right? So when Caribbean studies came out, it came out as part of the anti-colonial struggle that was taking place in the Caribbean. So why am I saying this? I'm saying this to highlight the role that students played in developing, in growing academia in the sense of creating space for people from thinkers from the global south and scholars from the global south to create various programs and disciplines. So I think we could learn from that internally, right? When we're thinking about it from a local piece. And now I want to go even more local and look at that from a more of a domestic piece. When you think about the Black Studies, the Black Studies program, but I'll say the Black Studies stream at York University in the Social and Political Thought program, we had students who were advocating to create space for a stream in the program. And I have to big up the students who are now professors now, who have their finished their PhD, Dr. Ola Mohammed and Dr. Evelyn Mpasa. So what I want to say is that we could learn, yes, we could learn from the US, but it's also important for us to learn and study what is taking place in Canada, right? And the second piece I want to add on, I think even before we talk about what we could do, etc., we have to define. That's what I was really looking forward to taking the first panel. We have to define exactly what is Black Canadian studies, or even what does Black studies look like in Canada. And pulling from thinkers like Ronaldo Walker, he talks about Black Canadian studies operate from a diasporic lens. So we have to critique the nation and academia from that in-between space. So my colleague Sam Tecle mentioned about his research looking at what's taking place in East Africa and how youth connect with the emerging New Black Canada. So when we're thinking about defining Black Canada and looking at students' movements, I think those things need to work together. Because some of the conversation I'm hearing is that Black Canada, we must look at it from a very national perspective, but it operates from outside. And the third thing I want to build from, and the sister, my colleague who just spoke, she said a few things that are very interesting. In talking about how do you build with that type of coalition in Latin America and across the Americas. And I think that's very important in how we inform Black studies in Canada, even Black Canadian studies. When we think about students' movement and youth movement in the recent, the last 2-3 years, Colombian new government, student Afro-Colombian people, particularly students, play critical roles in kind of invoking and pushing that new left-wing government, right? So for me, student plays an important role, so we can look internally, but also draw from outside in how we could incorporate that in establishing Black Canadian studies. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What are your responses? Underline concisely.
Okay, so I can try. Try. I think I like Chevy's point in thinking about perhaps our wariness and hesitation that we perhaps might meet this moment with. It's important for us to consider, I think, that these erections of Black Studies streams, programs, pseudo departments come post 2020, post George Floyd. Yeah? And I think what we can learn from US-based institutional history that we heard is also there's a way in which Black Studies departments and institutions, we see them after racial catastrophe, in the eruption of open conflict. So we should be weary with that, right? And then in stuff that I'm working on, I also look at the way in which I use Stuart Hall as an example, with the way in which he was made canonized as the architect and founder of cultural studies, while actively saying, don't do that to me, and don't do that to this field, to use Dr. Alkalimat's words, right? So I think the way in which Black studies might be used to bolster the nation, we might think about the way in which Black studies might also be used to bolster the institution. Yeah? The very institutions and universities that are challenging our students who are erecting encampments to cry for freedom. Right now, in McGill, in UFT, and across this country, right? So I think what we might learn is how institutionalization, professionalization, can in of themselves also be alienation, right? Forms of alienation. So what might it look like to heed Harney and Fred Moulton's thoughts about the underclassmen? Yeah? Robin Kennedy tells us about, take what you can from the institution. But remembering perhaps where our real work happens, or the work that Black Studies is primarily mostly interested in. And I say this from Chevy, Rhonda, and Ola, all the folks we were at York in our respective departments, smuggling Black Studies in a particular kind of way, and we agitated, and we struggled, and we got meeting with the president of the university. And the most thing I remember is that the president had a very difficult time saying Black students, Black graduate students. And I think now we might listen carefully, and now the presidents are saying Black very easily. So what does that signal for us?
Thank you so much, Henry.
Yeah, no, it's a big question, and I mean, I've relied primarily on American, I guess you say scholarship, because my work is on race and on Black lives matter, right? And Canada, while our histories are very different, the politics of race show strong similarities in terms of how Canada has imported, right, the black-white binary in ways we talk about crime, in ways we talk about, who's a deserving, undeserving citizen. So I think we should embrace the strengths of theorizing around race and white supremacy. What I loved when I was in the States was this radical critique, right, of the state, of white supremacy. That's what I want Black studies to be. I'm reminded of the sessions I attended on Afro-pessimism, on Black fugitivity, Black political economy. So I think in terms of theoretical work, there's so much to draw from the US in thinking about, white supremacy, anti-Blackness, and so on. The thing I would do differently then is that in my work, I center settler colonialism. It's right at the heart of my analysis of Canada, of racialization, and in the US, we still see they're not necessarily talking with each other, right? So we have Indigenous studies and we have Black studies. And so I purposely always put them together. And I think that's what we need to do as Black studies. Black studies should be anti-colonial. I'm even hesitant to call it Black Canadian studies because we Canadian is a colonial construct. I think that we should start with build Indigenous perspectives into our understanding of Canada as well.
Thank you so much, Anne-Marie. Thank you so much, colleagues. There are indeed things that we can learn from the US and other contexts as well. Thank you so much, Stacy, for that. And so moving on to priorities, immediate priorities. What would you say are the immediate priorities for those of us who are interested in Canada? And anyone is free to share their comments. I can call out names as well.
I can start again. It's fun. I have 3 thoughts on that. And of course, again, as a panelist earlier said, it's not exhaustive, but these are, I suppose, the top 3. The idea being, the first one being, there's a need, I think, to network and or at least communicate better. And it's not about creating some kind of center and one way of doing something or doing this work that we're talking about, but it's about communicating so that we can avoid redundancy and that we can avoid the siloing that leads us to still be here 15 years in the future doing the same work or doing something that someone else has already started or give, in any case, basically being coordinated. It's about telling the stories as well. I think the keynote really, said it well. We need to document, and of course that's also the historian in me speaking. It's important to create those primary sources. It's important to create our own, leave the traces so that there is something to build on. Otherwise, we keep being sort of plateauing. And I think there's a need to, as the panel with the students emphasized, to send the ladder back, to send the elevator back, or however you want to speak it. Because I think what I've noticed is that a lot of our senior individuals amongst us get caught up in a job. And it's easy enough. I mean, it is a job. At the end of the day, people have got to eat. But there's also a need to really nurture the next generation and really reach out to the next generation and create something that is sustainable for that generation. Otherwise, again, we continue sort of in quicksand. And the third is that we focus a lot, especially in Canada, maybe that's what makes it complicated. We focus a lot on the Anglophone stories and and contexts and experiences, and forget that it's not just about the Anglophone world in Canada. We should reach out to the Francophone world and localities and understand where the French and Francophone ties are and how we can bridge that gap and how we resolve this. I think that's a huge question that deserves a number of symposia, I think, to really corner it. So those are my 3
Thank you
points.
so much, Ornella. Chevy, I'll bring you into the conversation. What are your priorities?
And I'm going to tap back into what I mentioned earlier on. I think the first thing we need to do is define Black Canadian studies. I think that's key. And we have to also think about what is the goal for us for Black Canadian studies. Is it a Black liberation project? Is it just another neoliberal project for us to get access to resources to be part of that middle class or that upper middle class? So I think from there, I think that's a core piece for me. And I know they have scholars who have done that work, but I feel like we are continuously going back and forth with it. So I think that's one of the key things. And the second thing, going back to what I was saying in regards to not making Black Canadian studies as a neoliberal project, because then we become part of the problem, right? And the third aspect, strong, and I saw that, that's what I love the panel number 4 in regards to the role of community. I believe that there's a strong separation when it comes to Black academia and community. I remember as an undergraduate student, I shared with one of my mentors, I said to him, my mentor is based in community. I really want to establish or strengthen the bridge between community and academia. And he said to me, why would you build a bridge to a burning house? So the community already have that distrust with academia, the academic space. So it's important that we revisit those relationships and ensure that community plays a major role in how we establish Black Canadian studies and not just as a form of tokenism. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Anne-Marie, what are your thoughts?
Put me on the spot. Well, I have a big pet peeve in sociology, and that is the persistence in Canada of what's called the ethnicity paradigm or the race relations paradigm, right? So this is how, unfortunately, race was first really, well, talked about by white sociologists, the Chicago School, but in the process, they excluded Du Bois, they excluded Cedric Robinson, right? And so we find ourselves still today with a conversation about race that connects it always back to identity, always back to group characteristics. And, you know, my perspective on race is influenced more by people like Barbara Fields, by Du Bois, by Cedric Robinson, right? Which sees race as a system of domination, right? As a technique of rule, not as an identity. You know, certainly we have turned it in, we have, you know, embraced the idea of Blackness and turned it into something bossy. But, you know, fundamentally, Blackness originated as a white supremacist construct, right? To separate between who would be free and who would not. And so, you know, I still find myself with colleagues, you know, who, you know, when they teach about Black people, it's often as a form of victimize without positioning their own, you know, their own role as whites in the system, right? And so I want to abolish the ethnicity paradigm. I want to abolish the race relations paradigm in sociology. That would be one of my priorities. And also, I think we need to center the intersections of Blackness much more in a much stronger way. So gender, class was brought up earlier, colorism, history, right? Black people are such an incredibly diverse group, and we're not all equal. You know, some of us, you know, are struggling financially, others less so. And so I think we have to deal with that level of intergroup stratification that is also emerging more and more.
Absolutely. Intersectional analyses are important, and bringing back class analysis, absolutely important. Stacy, what are your thoughts?
I think when I first started thinking about this question, I was just like, okay, I am usually thinking about literature and, you know, critical theory, et cetera, so I tend to live in the abstract. And so the keynote, thank you, brought me back down to earth. So I kind of, said, what is an immediate priority? And I thought about collaboration, first and foremost, like collaboration amongst sort of like interdisciplinary collaboration. I was talking about a few minutes ago in terms of like hemispheric collaborations, thinking about, the works of like Tiffany Lethabo King, right, who says, I don't trust freedom or black dreams of freedom or dreams of black freedom. Sorry, English is my third language. Without taking into account, without thinking about indigenous freedom and indigenous liberation and sovereignty. So I think that's key. And so apart from that, community connections, bringing it outside of the sort of ivory tower and thinking about that.
Absolutely important. Sam, what do you think?
Okay, so I think I love what's being said. I think really quickly, what comes to mind when I'm hearing the narratives being spoken about is I think when I was a PhD candidate talking about my project, and I was telling like my professors, oh, there's this place I go and there's like black people from the Horn of Africa and there's black people from the Caribbean and black Canadians, and they're always arguing about black stuff. And then they're like, oh, so you want to study race? I'm like, no. Listen, they talk about blackness, they talk about history, they talk about ideology. It's like, okay, so like race relations? I'm like, no. They're like, oh, so you want to study racism? I was like, oh. They don't have a framework for thinking about black people knowledge exchange, right? In community. Yeah? Here we have a kind of adopted discourse and language and we can play the game. So I'm really interested in what Black Studies in Canada might teach us about how to understand each other better on our own terms, yeah? Maybe sometimes with these frameworks, maybe not. So avoiding the kind of brutal empiricism that comes when we focus on, I think Janelle might have said it earlier, Janelle Joseph, I believe it was, that said, I'm interested in a Black Studies in Canada that is not so interested in anti-Black racism. That's not solely defined by the racism that's visited upon us. Because we've done that a lot, especially if you're in sociology. We know that a lot, right?
Yeah, but there's still a lot of work to do.
No, 100%. But I think that there's perhaps Black Studies in Canada might be a site for something else. So in Christina Sharp's In the Wake, she says, of course the question is, we're defined by this anti-Black racism, right? No. But look what we've made in spite of it, right? So where do we study the in spite or the what we've made, what Black people's knowledge systems are amidst the racial catastrophe, right? So I think Black Studies in Canada might be something there, and we might need different methods. We might use different languages. It might not be English. We might use dance, yeah? We might use body. We might use, so I think there's something that we can do under the banner, to use that framing, of Black Studies in Canada that looks radically different than how we do knowledge making in the institution now. So that's what I'm interested in, yeah.
Absolutely. I think it's important to talk about the struggles, but also to talk about us as full human beings who love, who have joy, who have, favorite foods, holiday destinations, all those things. I think is so important. I would ask Hosea and Alpha, please, the time. I don't have time. I was looking to see if I have an indication of time. So please, 10 minutes, including questions. Thank you so much. So I will just ask one question, and we each get a minute. Good luck. Okay, we'll try this one. Other than enduring legacies of anti-Black racism and lack of institutional resources, what other barriers or challenges are standing in the way of enriching Black studies in Canada? And this time, I'll start with Sam. What do you think?
Sure, 1 minute. Yeah, I think a practical question would be, how are we going to keep funding this when they're not so interested in 2020 anymore, yeah? I think the retrenchment of the kind of disbursement of resources that we saw post, I guess, the George Floyd moment or post 2020 is, I think, emerging. This is practical and this is real. Yeah. So how are we going to be able to keep convening like this? I think is going to be a very real question. And that might be a question of Black Studies in Canada. It might be one of the foundational questions that we're going to keep doing this stuff. I think that's valid. I think how we avoid Black Studies in Canada being like the window dressing, the wallpaper, yeah, on a burning building, as Chevy said, the way administrations or institutions use the struggles that black people have mounted inside institutions as ways of saying, look how far we've come, yeah? And while we're inside the institution saying, but I think the building's on fire, yeah? So I think these are some of the kind of questions of how we, again, Hall, one of my guys, is how do we be in the institution but not of the institution, yeah? We must be, I think, weary and hesitant of buying into a particular kind of celebratory politics, I think, is this moment. So I think those are some concerns.
Stacy, what do you think?
I completely agree. I would just add, a barrier or challenge I see here. Maybe moving away from like hegemonic narratives, as somebody said this morning as well, there's no one way to be black, right? So there's not like a sort of global understanding of blackness. And so like if you ask, somebody who's Afro-Dominican, what does it mean to be black? Their sort of like answer will be completely different from somebody who's like, black Colombian or Afro-Brazilian, Afro-Canadian, black Canadian, etc. So I think thinking about, diasporic solidarities, but also like shared experiences, common experiences that are also distinct, right? I think that's important, and sort of moving away from hegemonic language, as Pablo was saying this morning, because I think it's very difficult to sort of think and articulate things sometimes in English, right? And so it's important, I think, to think about whether or not, there are like broken languages. So I always tell my students like, I don't speak Spanish. I think I speak like a sort of like Creolized version of Spanish. And so what does that mean? And so I think like moving away from these sort of like hegemonic understandings of what is attached to blackness is important.
Awesome. Chevy, what do you think?
Couple of things. Oh, we have 1 minute. So let me try and rush it. I think one of the barriers I'm witnessing in conversation with some of my colleagues, my cohort, the younger academics, is we see a lot of gatekeepers and police keeping of black studies in Canada and black Canadian studies. I think we have to be careful with that, especially for folks who I'm not saying that's the case for the more senior faculty and senior scholars, but I think we also need to create space for young scholars. So I want to thank the organizers for putting this together, for having graduate students, young scholars, and we could see the intergenerational conversation taking place. So I think we have to be careful with that, and that's why I'll go back to the piece on defining what we mean by Black Canadian studies. Is it is part of the Black Liberation Project, or is it part of a project for assimilation, right? The second thing I want to mention, as I stated earlier on, I'm based in Nova Scotia, going out to community, connecting with indigenized black communities across the province. Some of the critique from community and from scholars in Nova Scotia is the very Ontario-centric approach of articulating black Canadian studies or black studies in Canada. So I think it's important when we're having those conversations, we push it further than Ontario and going to BC, etc. So I think that's very key because it negates some of the experiences in those communities. For example, what I'm observing being in Halifax is there's some form of xenophobia. I mean, that's my articulation of it. That's Chevy Eugene's articulation of it. So be very careful. If you could reference Chevy, that's fine. Chevy Eugene's articulation of some of the xenophobia taking place in who qualifies as being black or African Nova Scotia, or African Nova Scotian in Nova Scotia. And I understand where they're coming from because there's some form of erasure taking place, right? Well, when we're talking about blackness, they are not part of that conversation. I do not agree with the tactic and the method, but I think it's important that we extend how we think about, define, and include when we talk about Black Canadian studies. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chevy. Ornella, what are your thoughts as barriers and challenges?
I think, this sort of circles back to a lot of things that have been already said here, but also in previous panels. The interdisciplinarity of Black studies, which is necessary and cannot be, we can't really go around it. puts it at a vulnerable, in a vulnerable position in the case where it's not just that the university is going to eventually move away from the post, 2020, post George Floyd moment, is that universities are simply under attack, generally speaking, funding, governments, and so on, and which means humanities are under attack, which means Black studies are under attack from that under that umbrella. And also, I think it is critical to lean into the joy, as Sam was saying, the dopeness, as Rhonda mentioned. I think it's critical. I do sport history because I generally want to highlight the joy. And I think it's critical because when we have that resistance to embracing the identity of Blackness, I think it comes from the notion that it is a victim identity. It is something lesser that no one should want. I mean, because it is a burden, but we should see it also as an opportunity and as a privilege, and we can't highlight that without highlighting the joy of it as well.
Thank you, Anne-Marie.
Yeah, no, I'm kind of moved by both things you said. So erasure, so that's been an ongoing issue, erasing Black history in Canada, and then your point about Black joy. And, I guess I have two things on my mind. Is one, that we are facing a very real right-wing backlash. And I mean, it has been, as we see the March for Equality, we see an oppositional reaction, right? A right-wing backlash. And that's the sort of how history is shaped. And so I think we have to brace ourselves for the opposition. But I think we can do it, through a kind of also by celebrating our achievements, by recognizing our strength. And one thing that I can tell you, having studied the history of Black resistance in Canada, is that for a population that has always been very small, prior to the 1960s, the Black population was no more than 1%. Despite that, we have had an outsized influence on progressive legislation. So, Black Canadians were at the forefront of desegregating cinemas, schools, colleges, in this country, introducing the first anti-discrimination legislation in Ontario in 1950s. So we, despite being outnumbered, we have had a profound influence on the politics of this country. And so it's happened in the same in the US. So I think we need to honor that history and those strengths and continue, to see that, I think, as sort of, what we're capable of.
Thank you so much, Anne-Marie. We'll open it to the floor. Any questions, comments? If there are no online, there are questions, comments? Not yet. Okay. If there are no questions yet, I have a question here. So, okay, there is, yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I wanted to do a comment because of the question that I did previously, which I think in my rambling, I didn't, like a lot of people focus on the is it worth it part, and I had a lot of positive feedback, and I'm so glad that I was able to be here and listen to all this talk, because bringing back to moving away from the abstract, which I guess is what made me feel this feel of not it being worth it. But I realized is when I was talking about not wanting to explain my humanity, when looking at Black studies and ensuring that it's us as Black individuals that are doing this study in whichever way we might want to see it as, that means that we're bringing our own experience and our own work that we want to do in, if it's in healthcare that you want to do it in, if it's in dancing, if it's in art, if it's in whatever, So that's what I'm taking away from this thing. And thank you so much, because it's bringing me forward to like going back into this profession. Is like, yes, I do not like the institution. Yes, I don't want to play into it. But I can take whatever resources that realistically I need to live and take that and be able to maintain and I'm saying this because of one lady that just gave me a note and left. And she was like, to answer your earlier question about is it worth it? Yes, always. As long as you keep the right audience in mind. And that audience will always be my people, my me, people that see me, and that's the work that I'm gonna do. So thank you for this panel.
Thank you so much. I think we'll call it a day. Thank you so much to the panelists for your thoughtful comments and contributions. And thank you so much for the audience for staying until the very last minute of the day. I'll hand it back to Hosea.
Thank you very much, panelists. Thank you, Selina and Panel 5, for providing such lively discussion on some of the future priorities for Black Canadian studies. A round of applause for them once again. So as we gradually come to an end, we want to thank all of you for attending this inaugural Black Futurities Emerging Black Studies in Canada conference. And we would like to thank the online participants also for their participation in this particular event. So the idea for this conference came out of our thinking of what would be the activity of the activity for the McMaster Research Institute for Black Studies, and what should this activity look like. So the conference started as an idea, and we had few lines as it into it, and this idea today is history. And that has been great work coming from a wonderful team. So we want to thank our sponsors, we want to thank the volunteers, we want to thank Dr. Wena for providing the land acknowledgements. We want to thank Dr. Walker for introducing our keynote speaker. We want to thank our very keynote speaker himself, Dr. Alkalimat, and for the wonderful insight you've given us, the charge that you have put us to continue. Okay, so at this point, I will just hand over to my lead, my boss, she has been wonderful, and I just want to say this for the record. I've worked under her for almost a year now at Dr. Alpha, and it's been a wonderful experience, learning experience, and I just want to replicate what she does for my students going forward. So, Dr. Alpha, I welcome you. A round of applause for her.
So just very quickly, I want to just reiterate some of what Jose has said, and really, can we have a round of applause for Dr. Alkalimat? He rearranged my brain. I have 1,000 questions to bother him about after this, and so, we really appreciate the work that you've done and you continue to do, and amazing.